Okay.
Yep.
Yes.
Here we go. Welcome to your June Marketo Engage Champion office hours. We're going to start off with some quick introductions to our panel. We'll go through some brief house rules and, of course, housekeeping. Cannot have a webinar without housekeeping. Talk to you about some upcoming Adobe opportunities and then the Q&A with our lovely champion panel. So house rules, just make sure this is user-focused and a safe space for everyone to learn, network, and problem solve. No self-promotion or pitching of any kind. Do not contact people outside the group without their consent. And if somebody shares their use case, please don't share that information without their consent. This meeting is being recorded. You should have gotten a consent to record when you logged in. I will share the recording and post it on the same page that you registered at mugs.marketo.com. You can always just search for the Marketo Championing user group if you don't have the link. I will also post the slides along with resources that we mentioned during the meeting. So never fear if you want to find those links again or watch us another section again. Please feel free to do so. I will send out the recording and slides via email. I will note that we're having some trouble with our mug emails that are going to spam. So you may want to look in your spam folder for that early next week, or just pop on the page and check that out. So without further ado, let's introduce our panel. My name is Amy Goldfein, and I am your moderator today. Kiara, want to go?
Yeah, I'm Kiara Riga. I am the Marketing Operations Manager at Digital Shadows and a two-time Marketo champ, and I'll be one of the panelists today.
Hey, I'm Melissa Day. I work for the Commerce Company, which is a manufacturing company in the B2B space. This is my first year as a Marketo champion, but I've been in Marketo for 10 years, a certified expert for 8 of them.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Kyle McCormick, and I lead our marketing technology team at Palo Alto Networks. I've been using Marketo coming up on 8 years, I believe, and I'm a 3-time Marketo champion.
Alex Greger, Senior Manager Market Operations for Skillsoft. I've been in Marketo for probably similar 7 or 8 years now. 4-time Marketo champion, and I host the Cleveland user group here.
Love it. Well, thank you all. Really excited to have everyone on the panel today. We have lots of great questions for you. So wanted to remind everybody that if you registered for this mug, you may not have actually joined the mug. So please make sure to go to the page and click join us. That way you will get invites to all the office hours. Additionally, if you would like to get a Marketo Engage certification or you need to renew your certification, they have changed the exams for what used to be called Marketo Certified Expert. There are now 2. They're both called Adobe Marketo Engage Business Practitioner Expert. That's a mouthful, but that's what it is. And the old exam is still live through the end of this year. And the new exam just launched, I think, earlier this month, and will be ongoing for, as long as they keep it live. So just know that there's 2 versions of the exam. The new one was designed working closely with the champions. And, many say that it is a, better, more accurate exam. Kiara, did you work on the exam?
Yeah, so I was on the team that wrote the new exam. It's very different from the old one. It's a lot more like the old one, you could kind of game the test. This one, you really have to know kind of Marketo, and you've got to read things very closely. So it's a much better exam, I would say, at actually testing your Marketo knowledge.
That's awesome. Thank you for that context. Also, it's not on here, but I think it's 50% off through the end of the month to take your exam. I will find a link for that. So if you need to renew or you're thinking about getting certified, this is a good time to do it. All right, so without further ado, we are going to move on to our panel questions. Okay, first one, I'm going to throw it out to Alex. What is the first thing you audit when you inherit a new Marketo instance, and why?
Great, thanks, Amy. So one of the first things, I've inherited a few instances in my time in Marketo. The first thing I usually go after is compliance programs. So GDPR, CASL, unsubscribe, preference centers, really making sure that whatever the internal kind of legal team has documented or described, the processes and procedures are kind of following that. And I would say the second thing is probably lead flow, making sure that there's like, whether you have a custom sync or not, you have lead flow, because that's one of the, if marketing doesn't have leads going to sales, marketing's in trouble very quickly. So those are probably the top two that I usually go through and audit very quickly within inheriting an instance. I'd love to hear if anybody else has any opinions on what they audit, or if they've inherited an instance though.
I totally agree with that. I think the only other thing I would look at is like the programs that control like when a lead is created, what happens, which is similar to the lead flow as well. But yeah, I think everything kind of builds on what happens when a lead is created. So I think that's pretty key as well.
Definitely. One of the first things I do too is not try to break it, but I do try to submit information and track it down. So I'll submit a Marketo form with a particular, unique email, and then actually follow their activity history to see what's firing in that scenario. If I add UTM parameters to the URL that I'm filling the format on, then what happens? Just because sometimes if you don't look at everything, you don't know what might be turned on and really having an impact.
Yeah, I do the exact same thing Melissa does. I think that's the easiest way for me, just following the audit log and seeing what's happening, because you can kind of follow along in a Marketo program and like checking the Marketo programs, making sure that's what it should do. Going back to what Alex was saying with like what GDPR should be doing, but if you actually like submit the lead and see what's actually happening, that's, for me, that's always the first thing I do.
And if you guys find problems, is there what do you troubleshoot first?
Audit log for the lead, just like see what happened and then click into the program and see maybe the filter is wrong, or if it just, if there's a skip in the flow step, maybe just take a look at that.
Yeah, I would say outside of audit log, the campaign, is it campaign queue that you can look at to kind of see what is active, and you can export that so you can quickly kind of pivot, bring it into Excel and pivot it and look at it and really identify.
The campaign queue or the campaign inspector?
Inspector, sorry. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. You want to tell people where they can find that? I don't know if it's super obvious.
Yeah, if you go to within if you have multiple workspaces or a single workspace, you just go to the marketing activities section and go to the top kind of little icon that is your default workspace. And then there should be a tab over to your right. If you don't have that tab, it's probably not activated. So you go to treasure chest and admin and make sure that it's like activated or turned on.
Yeah, that thank you. I feel like that's something that people don't know about. That's a really great feature. So thank you for that. Okay. Let's speaking of you guys were talking about compliance and GDPR. How do you stay on top of ever-changing privacy requirements, whether it's GDPR or other things happening, specific European countries or anywhere else globally? Kiara, you want to take this?
Yeah, so I think for me, like for a while, I was subscribed to a lot of like legal compliance, newsletters, because those would kind of clue me in that, okay, something's going to change or they're meeting and it might. But I always found that the person who would come to me first is our legal team. And so for me, the biggest key in managing any of these compliance things, whether things are changing or not, is having a really close, good relationship with your legal team. I don't think, because regardless of what changes in the law, every company is going to have a different interpretation of it, right? And so even if you know what's happening, you still need to work with your legal team to figure out how you interpret that and deploy it in Marketo. So I think for me, the biggest thing is just being really tight with those people. I don't know if anyone else has anything else that they do to stay on top of it.
No, I think you pointed out having a close relationship, because every company I've been at has a different point of view on it and a different level of risk they're willing to take. I think a governance committee is a big one, because GDPR is not just marketing. So I know the last 2 companies I've been at, we've had a governance committee that crosses HR, sales, support, IT, etc. And somebody from each kind of department sits on it. And we meet kind of quarterly to discuss updates, changes, what needs to be done, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's great. I think to have a cross-functional committee, right? Because ultimately, the answer to all compliance questions is whatever your legal team says. Obviously, you want to like educate them, and you may like help them understand how your marketing works and what you'd like to accomplish. But like ultimately, right, they're the ones who are going to make the decisions. So I think that's just really great. A more technical question we can pivot to. I know this is a problem that many of us have. How do you identify duplicates as soon as the duplicate gets created? I'm guessing so they don't build up like they happen in many of our instances. Melissa, you want to take this one?
Yeah, definitely. So there's a couple of cool areas of Marketo that you can find your possible duplicates. It's actually built right in as an out-of-the-box feature because this is such a popular question, right? This is something that everybody cares about. So if you go into your database area, into System Smart List, you'll see a list that's already there called possible duplicates, and you can play around with the filters, right? For this particular question, it's about duplicate email addresses, but you could also leverage this same smart list to look for people who have the same first and last name, or a couple other fields that may share the same value to really identify that it's the same person. Leveraging this smart list, it could be something that you remind yourself to look at. If you wanted to combine it with a logical aspect, right, to get some kind of an email alert when someone joins that list, you could create a smart campaign based on joining that smart list, right, that you could have run, every day. And for anyone who was just added to the possible duplicate smart list, you could have it trigger an email alert to send to you, just letting you know that there are people there. And then you can go from there and decide if you delete them, if you merge them, how you want to handle it.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Anybody have a follow-up on that?
Yeah, and I know Marketo ProServe also has a backend deduping tool. So there's definitely other vendors out there in the market that do deduping, but Marketo has one that they can. I don't remember the cost. We did it a couple of years ago. That you can, when a duplicate comes in, you can add them to a static list, and then the Marketo backend tool will merge them with an existing record. So if there's something that's that a system is creating duplicates and you want to just clean it up as it comes in, that's one option that we use as well. I don't know the name of it. I think it was
Easy Merge.
What was it?
Is it Easy Merge? I didn't know.
I think it is Easy Merge.
Do it on Trigger. I thought it was only batching. Interesting.
Yeah. Well, the trigger is we're adding them to a static list, and then it gets merged, I think, every night.
Cool. Yeah, and there's certainly also third-party vendors that do that.
Yep.
We have multiple questions about duplicates, so it seems like a hot topic. Let's talk about data management. Can you share best practices for recurring list cleansing, scrubbing, and maintenance automation? Alex, you want to take that one?
Sure. So actually, one of my favorite things about Marketo is the data hygiene aspect of it, the capabilities it has within that tool. So similar to kind of one of the first things you do when you inherit a instance with the GDPR and other kind of key things, as a secondary element, you should probably look at setting up some kind of hygiene type of programs that run just in the background, looking for whether it's inactivity, specific bounce related codes, invalid emails, junk emails. There's a great spreadsheet that I know fellow champs have contributed to out there in the mop space of like all different types of junk that people can, there's like keywords that you can enter into your smart list, like the kind of ASDF type of situation where you look for kind of those specific values and collecting those, and then whether you suspend them immediately, delete them immediately, just collect and review regularly, that's up to you and kind of your company. I'm not fond of deleting anything on an automation standpoint. I don't tend to trust the users in the tool or the tool to delete something automatically. So I tend to collect, review, and delete on like a monthly or quarterly basis. So that's kind of how I go about list cleansing, scrubbing, maintenance within the tool. Then there's all sorts of different things from a list import standpoint that you could do. You could have a kind of a list import template. We use a script, like a Python script here internally that runs and kind of goes through all of our pick list values and stuff like that. It's a little more technical, but you could do like a macro in Excel to scrub. You could do a lot of different things.
Cool.
Yeah,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
Amy, I really want to echo that, what Alex was saying about not having the system delete data. Just because when I was an intern first getting started in Marketo, I think this was right after I became full-time, we had a trigger that I didn't know deleted records in our database. And it was when someone got changed, when email invalid or blacklisted got changed to true, it deleted them from the database. And I really didn't know what I was doing. I accidentally blacklisted our entire database. And then I like randomly looked at the database. I'm like, why is the numbers going down? It's because we had a trigger listening for when someone gets blacklisted, the database gets deleted or that lead gets deleted. So highly recommend what Alex was saying. Don't set up anything that auto deletes. What we do is we have, if someone gets added to a list that's, to be deleted, we delete it that way. But we don't have any triggers anywhere else that deletes records, just because it's so easy to accidentally mark something that you don't want to mark or just have an accident. So definitely want to echo that. That was one of the biggest things I learned very early on, is not to have something that deletes records.
Probably something to also add to that initial question of what you should look at when you first inherit is go through that campaign inspector and look for anything that is set up to delete and possibly change it immediately to add to lists or something.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Much easier to have a human look at something before you auto delete. That must have been a heart attack moment, Kyle.
Oh yeah, no, so luckily we caught it early on. And Marketo support, I think we had to pay them. I don't even know what it was, but they did get the database back from the last backup, so we did miss a couple of leads. But yeah, that was a fun experience, especially like my first job right out of school, and I was like, cool, I'm gonna get fired. This is great. Luckily I didn't, but
there's something that I learned about it in like a strategy workshop called the fundamental attribution error, which is when there's a mistake made, we tend to attribute it to the person, but often there's something else at play, like the system or the environment. And any environment where you let somebody who's fresh out of school run your entire marketing automation system, like that's the risk you run. Like,
yep.
Like, I mean, we all like laugh at the whole like HBO intern thing, but HBO let their intern set up and fire off emails to hundreds of thousands of people. Like, that's not the intern's problem, that's HBO's problem. So I think we've all made major marketing ops mistakes. So that might be like a really fun webinar, like your biggest moops.
That's definitely up there. Yep. That's one of mine. I've had multiple. Even like to this day, like I'm still, I've been in Marketo for 8 years, and it's like, yep, I made a stupid mistake, because it's so easy to make a dumb mistake, like just go through the motions, think I have it, and figure out a filter or something like that. So definitely can still happen.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think I have a lot of users who are like, oh, I've been in Marketo for so long, I don't need to QA. It's like, no, I even QA, I'm certified, I'm a champ, whatever. Like, you don't do it because you don't know Marketo, you do it because you know, anyways.
I had something happen similar where like an email went out that was like blank, and it turned out that the person who was in charge of the nurture, there was like multiple templates in the content program, and she like picked the wrong one. And when I was talking to her about it, I was like, walk me through, like we have this like really detailed, like I call them SOPs because I used to work in a laboratory, like really detailed instructions. She was like, oh, well, I'm like, now that I'm better at it, I don't like to use SOPs. I'm like trying to do it from memory. And I was like, no. Every time follow the SOPs. But then I discovered is that the SOPs were like pages long, right? With like screenshots and super detailed. And like when you've done it a few times, that's overkill. So I added at the top of all the SOPs, like a quick snapshot that like, if you've done this before and you just need more like a checklist, you don't need super detailed instructions, and that, help people, follow the instructions a little bit better. We actually, speaking of processes, where'd it go? We had a great question about documenting processes and procedures. So would love to hear about that. Alex, you want to take that?
Sure. I saw that question and I didn't know if they were looking for tools or for kind of best practices. So I'll give a little bit of both. From a best practice standpoint, but what I like to do is interview other people within the company to understand if there are tools in place or processes in place already for centralizing processes and procedures in terms of documentation. So a lot of times your Salesforce team might already have a tool that you can tag in on from a marketing operations standpoint. That way it's kind of centralized. Some tools that I like to use, there's like the kind of flowchart related ones like draw.io, Lucid, stuff like that, where you're kind of doing complex flows or something that you want to kind of visually kind of see what it looks like, or like life cycle modeling or something like that. But in terms of like the data side, I usually just fall back on Excel, like data dictionaries or kind of schemas for different objects. And then I usually just fall back on Word documents and using kind of table of contents and kind of structuring headlines and stuff so it's easily navigated and you can click through and easily get to sections. And then I think the key point of all of that, though, is centralizing your documentation so you don't become the kind of the hoarder of all the information, if you will, that you centralize it so and you educate so other people can kind of utilize it. If they have a process they're running on it, they know how you've documented before, so they can kind of follow that same process, same information, stuff like that. But would love to hear what the other people would have to say, maybe on how their experience is.
I would also, I totally agree with everything you said. I would also say, like, I have 2 sets of documentation, right, in 2 different Google Drives. I have on the ops team, I have the really detailed, here's the trigger, here's the flow, all of that. But then I also have like an easy thing for leadership or, the marketing team that's not really in Marketo to understand, kind of like explaining it to you as if you're 5 years old, what happens when a lead is created, right? Because a marketer wants to know that information, but they're not going to understand what a trigger or what this flow step actually means. And so I think it's important to know your audiences and to have different documentation that caters to every audience.
100%. That is a great point. And I think you were spot on knowing the audience and tailoring that so it's not something technical that somebody glazes their eyes over.
Yeah, that's thank you guys for that feedback. I think that's, Kiara, I think perspective is really important. Anytime you're doing stuff and presenting, knowing your audience and knowing you have to give different information to different audiences is really key. I'm going to pivot to a more technical question about managing lead routing in Marketo when it's connected to a CRM that is not Salesforce or Microsoft Dynamics. Melissa, you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. So this is a little bit of a methodology kind of question, right? Because I know part of this question assumes that you're doing lead routing in Marketo. And so the first part of my answer to this question is I probably wouldn't manage lead routing in Marketo, even though you can, even though, especially if you have Salesforce or Dynamics, because that out of the box integration exists, you have flow steps available to you that are change the owner or sync across to your CRM and assign to this particular person. But in reality, what I have found in a lot of the different instances I've been in, whether it's Marketo and Sugar CRM or Salesforce, something that is a little bit more standard. If you leverage Marketo to really be the master of the data and to be pushing the data into the CRM, keep Marketo responsible for the data integrity and make sure that your sync is working across the board. If you're pushing leads into a general bucket, let the CRM tool pick it up and let the CRM be responsible for really determining from that point, based on the data that Marketo is sending over, who to send it to, whether it's a queue of people or a particular user based on product interest or based on the activity that they took. That would really be the line in the sand that I would draw. It's just kind of changing the operational thinking about that one.
Yeah, anybody else have thoughts on that? I personally have not managed anything besides Salesforce. So
same. But every Marketo instance I've done, and we've never done lead routing in Marketo either, just because it's not really the source of truth for sales data. So that's why we've just really kept everything out of Marketo and have the CRM do it.
Yeah, I think Marketo's job is to get the information as clean as possible and over to your CRM as quickly as possible and let the CRM do it. I think is definitely the way to go. I'm going to ask another technical question for Alex. This person is new to marketing automation platforms and Marketo, but I think this is not necessarily a newbie question. This is also for more advanced users. Can you talk about how custom objects work?
Sure. So if you have an understanding of kind of the databases in Marketo or databases in Salesforce, you kind of have lead, contact, account, opportunity. They're different objects. So in certain situations, you don't have a standard object or you have a need for kind of a separate data set, a data table. You can think about it I always simplify it to like a CSV. You think of it as you need a CSV that is related to something else, and you need to relate that within Marketo. So it allows you to bring in like Salesforce related custom objects. So if you have one already built in Salesforce that you want to leverage, you could sync those. You could also create custom ones through updating them through an API or a third-party vendor of some sort. And the key elements of it is it has a kind of a link to either the lead or the company or account is how it connects it to the database that lives in Marketo. And then you have kind of triggers and filters off of that. One of the key elements to remember is the only way to really bring the data into Marketo from a kind of a usability in like a export format or visually bring it into like an email or something like that is velocity scripting. You can't kind of get it, like you can't build a smart list and see a column that is a custom object related value. You can use them as filters, saying, are they a part of that? And do they have one of the kind of fields that are built within it to kind of direct an audience or target them for a trigger or a process or something like that. But to get the data out, you really need kind of a API connection to pull that data. But I've used them in different vendor relationships. We have an e-com part of our business. So we use it for our e-com piece. We've used it for intent related data. There's a lot of intent vendors out there that connect the dots, and it's really leveraged when you have a one-to-many type of situation where you have a single record and they're doing maybe multiple actions. You want to track each of those individual actions separately and not have a kind of a field overwritten every time in those situations.
I think that was a really great explanation, Alex. Anybody else have other examples? I think for me, it was really hard to understand custom objects until I thought of some use cases. Anybody else have other use cases you want to share?
Yeah, so I think my use case is slightly different. So we're obviously a large enterprise customer or company. So we have a ton of events going on, a ton of list uploads. And we're one of Salesforce's bigger customers. So we hit a lot of errors in Salesforce when we're syncing data from Marketo to Salesforce. So there's a lot of lock row errors, a lot of data timeouts that we're hitting. So we're using custom objects for a lot of our list uploads. So we created a Marketo campaign member within Marketo, kind of acts like a Salesforce campaign member. So we do the list upload in Marketo, and then we create a custom object within Marketo as well that has all the unique UTMs, all the data from that list upload, so we can track it specifically for that event. And then we use an ETL tool like Trade.io or Marketo, or there's a ton of other tools out there that does data transformation and sending it to Salesforce via API. So that's what we're doing for list uploads. We're actually not connecting Marketo to Salesforce using the native campaign sync, but we're using Trade.io to push the data from the Marketo custom object directly into a Salesforce campaign. So that's really cool because now we have unique UTMs. We're making sure that the UTMs on the campaign member in Salesforce are updated for each event, especially because if you can get UTMs on campaigns in Salesforce by doing workflows, but if you do 2 uploads at the same time for 2 different events, it's going to copy the most recent onto that campaign member. So we're using this solution to kind of making sure that we have a unique UTM value for all of our campaigns and campaign members, and making sure that the data is syncing over kind of more efficiently than using the native sync. So that's one thing that we use. And then we also use, there's some vendors, I know Alex was kind of talking about this. I know On24 does this. So On24 has like 3 different API connectors into our platform. One of them actually creates a custom object. So we're using that API connector to create a custom object for every On24 webcast, and you get like minutes viewed, how many sessions that they looked at. It's more granular data that you want to stamp on the lead, but you don't want to put on a field because it's going to keep getting overwritten. So now we have that unique record within Marketo of here's how many minutes that they looked at the webinar title, the panelists on there. So we can use Velocity Script to send a thank you email based on how much they've engaged. Maybe they only jumped in for a second. So we can then do a different email to that person for that session saying, hey, looks like you didn't watch the entire thing. Here's a recording if you want to watch it. So it just helps us personalize the email messaging a little bit more based on that custom object.
I love that. I love that with the campaign member. I think maybe you need to write a blog post about that, Kyle. That's very cool.
Yeah, we've definitely refined it. There's been a lot of learnings from it, but it's helped making sure that we don't have that lock row error every time we do a campaign sync, just because the volume that we're doing is so high, it naturally is going to time out. So
yeah, for sure. Well, thank y'all both for your feedback. Speaking of webinars, somebody had a question about optimizing the add to calendar link in webinars. They said using GoToWebinar, but I think it, for many, it's sort of applicable to many things. How to optimize your calendar links in your emails. Melissa, you want to take this?
Yeah, sure. So there's a lot of different things that you can do with any webinar integration, especially the ones that are out of the box and nice and convenient for Marketo, like GoToWebinar. But we try to leverage as tokens as often as we can in those programs. So by creating a local token in that program, you already have the member webinar URL token that you can put and plug and play anywhere. So generally what we'll do is add a calendar file token to the program and then populate that with, the same time as the webinar, the title of the webinar will include the member webinar token URL inside of the add to calendar token that's in the program, and then link to the calendar file token inside of the email itself. So for the sake of simplicity, I think that's the easiest way to get the calendar file with that unique webinar member URL so that you don't have to send your confirmation or your reminder through GoToWebinar because they don't look as nice as what they can look like in Marketo. When it comes to optimizing it in the email itself, we always try to include a text hyperlink and a button just for people who, you have different strokes for different folks. We want to make sure that people attend. So really optimizing that add to calendar, we include it in the confirmation email that you get as soon as you register. And we include it in, we send a reminder 24 hours before and 1 hour before. And we include it there too, you know, just to make sure that they have it if they want to block that time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Anybody else have thoughts about that? All right. Speaking of emails, somebody had a question about customizing Marketo templates without having to recode them. Alex, you want to take this?
Sure. Again, I'm interpreting this question and I'll answer it kind of in two different ways, I guess. The first way I interpret it is the Marketo kind of templates that are given to you in kind of the library that they, like when you open Marketo, you have a library of templates that they've provided. Leveraging those, you can probably get your brand or design team to provide you imagery or colors to swap out in the editable areas without needing to really recode everything. You could kind of basically take it, clone it, and then add kind of specific elements that are related to your company. The second way I interpreted that is kind of the old school templates where you used to have like 3 of the exact same templates, but you had a -1 column, -2 column, or template with button, template without button. Marketo has really gone a long ways in the past. I bet you it's been around for 2 years, maybe 3 years, with their new modular template, allowing you to really customize, create kind of a master template that has a whole bunch of different modules available. You can drag and drop them in. I know that's one of the first things I do when coming in, and I see kind of the instance using kind of the old templates that have all different variations. It just causes, if you've ever had to go through rebrand and you have all those templates, it causes so much frustration to go through and update 20 different templates and all the emails kind of tied to those versus one master one. So you could have an agency, you could have a developer, somebody create kind of a initial master template that has a wide variety of modules in it. Then it's a simple drag and drop the different modules that you would like for your specific communication. So you can have that 2 column, 1 column hero image, or kind of a maybe a footer with social, footer without social. Those are all modules you can kind of put in place at the front, and you can add to it. That's the great thing about a modular template, is you don't have to create a new one. You can just add a new module when your kind of company needs or has the need for that.
Yeah, for sure. I think the ability to have those super long template, and then what we do, I call them like shells. So like within our email sends or within our webinars or events, I've pulled in like the pieces that we typically use and like tweaked them to look right. But it allows you, you know what, actually, I want this to be 2 columns instead of 1 column, or I don't want a banner, that you don't have to completely start over. I think that's like what's really sucks. If you have a bunch of different templates, then you're like, shoot, all my work is, you know, is not done. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for answering that, Alex. Got a bunch of questions about email, so we'll try to go through a couple of them. Somebody wanted to ask about, how do you transition to using nurtures, also known as engagement programs? How do we leverage this idea in our company? Kiara, you want to take that?
Yeah, so that's actually something that I kind of had to go through at my new company, right? It's not new anymore, but once I joined here, we didn't use any kind of engagement programs at all in our instance. Everyone was doing just weekly emails. And so I think there were two kind of hurdles to overcome. And the first one, I think, was the harder one, was getting the team to kind of buy in on the tech. And the way that I went about that was like clocking how much time it took them each week to create what, like, their nurture emails, and then looking at, okay, of these nurture emails, how many of them are you using the exact same content and you're just recreating it? And that like was a really great sell to the team. Another thing, and what really pushed it over the edge, was we wanted to get more granular about sending nurture emails to people's specific interests. So we did kind of an interest scoring, and then if people are trying to do that manually, that's going to take forever, right? To have people do a different nurture manually each week. And so I think that's a really important piece too. So I would say, first, look at how much time you're going to save. Second, look for a way that you could personalize your marketing more with nurture programs that you would be just not feasible without them. And I think those are really good ways to sell it internally. And then in terms of actually getting started and building the programs, you will need some help from marketing, obviously, like writing the copy. But I would start, there's so much good like free content online about how to create nurture programs. I believe Amanda Thomas has done a couple of like webinars and summit. That's kind of her specialty, and they're fantastic. So I would look for, in community, in summit recordings, just look online. You'll find tons of stuff for how to do really cool things with nurture. Does anyone know if in the like program template library that you can import if there's a nurture one? Because that could be a good way to get started as well.
Yeah, there is one. It's very basic. It doesn't take into account like the scoring that you were talking through, but it's a good start if you only have like one product and it's really like one small thing. That's a good template to get started with.
I just popped into the chat. You're right, Kiara. Amanda is the queen of nurture, and she's got a bunch of presentations, but she was at the Austin Mug, so I just popped a link to that. And also, Kiara, you mentioned your interest scoring, which was a really great presentation, so I put in a link to that. Anybody else have thoughts about getting started with nurture?
Actually, real quick too, I know, Kira, thanks for mentioning it. Import program. I don't know if a lot of people know that you can actually import programs from Marketo's template library. So when you're in marketing activities, right under the like marketing activities tab, if you click new and then click import program, you can kind of see some of the pre-built programs that Marketo built that you can import into your own instance. I didn't know about this until like a year ago, so it's definitely helpful if you're really new to Marketo and trying to figure out like what to bring in. It's a good template to get started with.
I didn't know that you could. It's been so long since I've imported a program template. I didn't know that they were just there.
Yeah.
Just literally.
Yeah, no, you can. So when you select a program, it says subscription, and then you can just choose Marketo program library. And it has, I think, 20 or 30 different types of different programs. So there's, I'm looking at right now, there's nurtures, there's emails, there's a lot of email, different programs, landing pages, operational programs. So data management's in there, preference center, everything. So it's really cool.
That is really cool. I know if you ever work with a consultancy, they also can import their program templates, which is a great way to get started. Let's see, we had some more questions about email. What are some ways you've optimized your email programs? Melissa, you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. So I think the first part of email optimization is go from it being this giant topic to figure out what is it that you want to optimize, right? It's kind of like that your second grade science experiment when you have a plant that like you either water it or you don't water it, but you always keep it in the sun. Like you have to have one thing that's different every time. So when it comes to email optimization, anytime that I want to start that exercise, it's identifying the one thing that we're looking to improve or to change, and the one tweak that we're going to make as a proof point to really determine if that's going to do anything for us. So let's just say we're running an A/B test. We'll limit it to like subject line only. and make sure that we're leveraging whatever we learn as the way that we're going to move forward before we try to learn the next piece and optimize the next piece. So that would be the kind of step one, is figure out what do you want to optimize and how are you going to learn what you can optimize. A/B testing is a great way to do that. There's a couple other like just best practices that I would look for. We always run litmus testing. So whether you use like an email on acid or litmus itself, or there's a lot of great tools out there where you can send your email through a platform and see what it looks like in a multitude of browsers, whether it's desktop or mobile, Gmail or Outlook, because you may not know it from the Marketo preview window, but that button that looks really great to you may look really terrible to the person who you're sending it to. And that could be the reason why you're not seeing the clicks that you want to see. Plus, there's your general best practices of just keeping things scrollable, making sure that things are interesting, making sure you're optimizing both your HTML version and your text version. And some of that could go back even to the documentation question that we had, figuring out what is the process that you go through when you build an email, what are the best practices that you're going to hold as a standard, and how do you QA before something gets deployed?
I'd love to ask sort of a larger question that who DM'd me? Christina DM'd me this question about if you're new to building out email automation and email journeys, how do you get started? Like it's kind of daunting. You're like, we need to start an email program, but like, where do you start? Like, what's the baby steps? How do you plan it? Does anybody have any thoughts on how Christina can get started?
I would say the first thing that you do is figure out really, really basic. Who do you want to email and what do you want to say? It is so easy to get so caught up in the tactic that you feel like you have to do a newsletter or you feel like you have to send an invitation for an event or something like that. And instead of trying to prescribe the email strategy based on what you think the right tactic is, really break it down into who are you trying to talk to and what do you want to say? And let that theme really dictate what kind of email it is that you want to send, and then that will help you to understand how you build the smart list to determine your audience. So the first email that we may have sent for like a particular product line, I work for a chemical manufacturing company, so all of our content is not super exciting. So sometimes it's hard to figure out what is interesting and who is going to care about this when we send it out. But we'll figure out, maybe this is a message for anyone who has filled out a form that they've been interested in one of our products in the past year. We want to let them know that product, we just released a new case study featuring that product. So we take that example and we say, okay, the list of people is going to be based on the form fill in the last year, and the content is going to be promoting this piece of content, this case study. So when we build the email, the subject line is new case study about this product. And we just kind of take it baby steps from there, if that helps.
That's great. Thank you, Melissa. Anybody else have advice for new email marketers?
To me, it's I would agree with everything Melissa said, and kind of in that same point, understanding who you're sending to. So really understanding that persona and what value add you're trying to give in that email. So what is it that you're really trying to solve from a problem maybe that they might have, a roadblock, anything like that, but really kind of coming down to who you're speaking to and that value add that you're sending. Because if you're not adding value, why send it? And if you're sending to my phrase to my team all the time is, and to the larger organization I work for, is if you're sending to everyone, you're sending to no one. Like when you're mass sending to your entire database, realistically, a very small percentage of them are actually going to receive it due to kind of deliverability items, and the other side of that is very few people are going to care about it. So really defining who you want to send to, and making sure you're refining that over time and really providing that value add in your communications.
I love that. If you're sending to everyone, you're sending to no one, you should tattoo that yourself. It's phenomenal. Speaking of things that you can use in email, somebody had a question. It was just kind of a general question about building segmentation. Kiara, you want to talk about your segmentation strategy?
Yeah, so, well, I figured I would go into just how we build segmentations first, and then we can kind of talk through some use cases. So the first thing you want to keep in mind, and like the biggest gotcha for segmentation, is really keeping in mind the order, right? So a segmentation we can use for so many different things. It's essentially a way to sort people such that they can't end up in more than one bucket, right? And so the first thing you want to keep in mind is the order of your segments, because if someone, you'll create the segments as a list of different smart lists. If someone fits the top one, it's not even going to look at the lower ones. So you want to say, like, let's take, for example, you're doing e-privacy stuff with them. People who have explicitly opted out of anything, that's going to want to be your first one, because even if they fit, let's say they're in the US and they fit because it's CAN spam, you don't want them falling in this if they've unsubscribed, right? So you want that to be the top catch-all for everything. So that's really what you want to keep in mind. And then you'll build it just like a normal smart list. But one thing that really got me is you want to keep in mind that as these are kind of processed as trigger campaigns when things change on your lead record. So you don't want to do anything with, let's say, like a relative date, like this date is in the past before X amount, because no data value is changing for that. So Marketo doesn't know to move that person into the next segment. So I had a really tough time with that the first time I tried to set up like e-privacy segmentations. Where like we expired consent after a certain amount of days. And so I created it and I was like, why is nobody moving back into that bucket? Well, it was because you need something that's a trigger. And so the way that I got around that, which obviously we don't want to create a ton of different fields, but I had a field that said, like, essentially I had a smart campaign running that after this date is, 30 days in the past or whatever it is, check this flag. And then once that flag was checked, that's what the segmentation's referenced. So that's kind of one way to get around that. And then in general, I think the biggest use cases for segmentations, I would look at e-privacy and just generally like marketability. And then also anything, like we use it a ton for dynamic content. So we have two very large and different presences in the UK versus the US. And for our nurture, we don't want to have two separate nurtures. So we just use dynamic content. We have a segment for UK, a segment for US, and then everyone else is in default. And then we have dynamic content so that the UK team can send essentially the same email, but a little bit more proper, and the US team can like take a little more risks because that goes over better in that region, and things like that. So that was my very, very long-winded explanation of segmentation. So I don't know if anyone else has anything to add.
Yeah, I think the one thing to remember, so segmentation, you kind of mentioned this as well, segmentation is like a trigger. So one thing that we found out the hard way is Marketo is not really case sensitive, but if the cases on a field change, it does pick it up for segmentation change. So a good example of this is we have a persona segmentation, and one of our personas is CXO. In Salesforce, the pick list is capital C, lowercase x, capital O. But some of the integrations that we have, they're passing over CXO in all caps, or they're pushing it over in lowercase. And when we sync it over to Salesforce then changes it back to the case that's in the pick list and pushes it back to Marketo, which then triggers the segmentation change again. Even though the segment's not changing, it still needs to evaluate it. So that's the one thing to kind of keep in mind, that it is a trigger. If it changes, it's still going to trigger the segmentation.
Ooh, that's good. Any other segmentation gotchas? I feel like there's hacking in there.
Found that out this week, actually. That was we're like, why do the segmentations keep getting backlogged? And that's because of like the case of the field was changing.
Yeah, I had something happen once where my Salesforce admin changed all of our countries to the full value instead of the
Abbreviation. Yeah.
changed, and everybody went through segmentation all at once, or I had a segmentation I created before the values were all set, and then entire system was going through segmentation. You won't see it necessarily in your campaign queue because it's like a pre-processing thing. But yeah, that's always fun. And you'll see in a lead record, the change segment, they happen pretty quickly. It's one of the first things that happens when a record's created, but it's not immediate.
You have to make sure, I think timing is a good thing to keep in mind. We use segmentation to manage preferred language. It's kind of the same idea as US versus UK. So if we're sending out an email in Spanish and English and French, we leverage segmentation so that we're still only managing one of those emails. Well, on creation of a net new record, it's no problem because the segment happens really quickly. But we have forms that are also in those other languages. We have a hidden field called preferred language. So if you fill out a form in English originally, and then 2 weeks later fill out a form in French, your preferred language updates to French. Well, it takes a minute for your segment to update. And we had a smart campaign. The trigger is filling out the form and the flow step is sending the email. We couldn't figure out why the emails were sending in English. And we had to add a wait step in for 1 minute just to wait for that segmentation update before the email would go out.
Yeah, totally. We are at time. This was wonderful. Thank you, panel, and thank you, attendees. Like I said, I will send out the email with the recording and the slides with all the links if you did not catch them. So thank you all. I hope everybody has a great rest of your Friday and a great weekend. Take care.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks.